Hi, I'm Jake Poser.
Hi, I'm Lauren Miller.
Hi, I'm Ruth Pace.
Hi, I'm Alex Kaplan.
And we're here to talk about articles and comments.
Yeah,
Yeah, super fun. Who wants to go first with
I'll talk about
film dialogue?
So the first, we got a lot of articles about men versus women in the film industry and in theater in general. And the first one we're going to talk about is film dialogue from 2000 screenplays broken down by gender and age. And this article was meant to a group of people got together and that instead of just talking about all this rhetoric, a lot of people have talk about a lot of rhetoric, talk about how men dominate the film industry, but they don't really have a lot of data to back it up. This group of people got together and actually formulated as much data as they could in a short amount of time. So how they broke it down was they started with film movies, and then they broke that film movies, they broke it down into Disney movies, and from that they broke it down into just Disney princess movies, and they found that actually men do speak more often than women. Even like in Mulan, where like the main character is a woman dressed as a man, like a man still dominates the speaking roles, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Because Mushu had 50% more
Yeah.
lines than Mulan did.
Yeah. And they also broke it down to like what women talk about in movies, and it still wound up being that men won that category as well. And they did it to like they talked about the Bechdel test.
Oh,
Yeah. So like that was a previous article that we were written about, which was kind of cool. So like it was interesting to see that like multiple people are using the same style of research and like categorization. That's a word. To line films up against each other. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's amazing, honestly. Just the first time I heard about the Bechdel test, just thinking about a lot of movies, which I think of like as female-centric movies, how many of those movies actually fail the Bechdel test? Because like most of them have some sort of romance storyline that centers around a man, once again, that is like the cornerstone to the plot of the entire movie, and you realize that the vast majority of the conversations in that movie actually, despite the fact that they are between women, actually center around men, and it's just kind of interesting to think about how much of our film industry is just men.
Yeah.
What they do.
Even like just to clarify for further conversation, the Bechdel test is a test that was created by, does anyone know?
Alison Bechdel.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. And essentially, to pass the test, you need at least 2 female characters who are in the same scene and are talking to each other about something that is not a man. And in a couple of films, they also specify that the 2 female characters have to be named, just because sometimes there's like 2 women who are like, hey, did you see like Saturday last night? No, I didn't. And like the background, but they're not important enough to have names.
Yeah. How do you guys feel about the part of the article that talked about women when they age, like men when they age had more lines, and then women when they age had less lines?
I think that's like a terrible thing in Hollywood, how it's like it's okay for a man to get older and they actually increase their job opportunities, but as a woman gets older, then she just can't work, which is terrible.
I remember seeing a couple articles on Facebook maybe a year ago about like Meryl Streep versus George Clooney and the reviews they get, because they're roughly the same age, and yet George Clooney is considered to still be like at the top of his prime and like this gorgeous man, whereas Meryl Streep is like in public opinion considered not super attractive, and she gets a lot of negative reviews because she's older when she's really just the same.
Or she's typecast at this age as like the mother or the matriarch, and she's no longer like something I've realized is she's no longer considered, although she is a beautiful woman, like sexual or anything on
She's
that.
not really longer considered like a lead role.
Yeah.
He's now much more in supporting roles, but George Clooney, there's still movies where he is the main character.
Yeah, all his movies. Okay, what are we talking about next?
That's Alex.
Oh, okay. How one simple list is changing the face of American theater.
This was cool.
Yeah, so basically, only 22% of produced plays in the U.S. are written by women. So a group of women got together and decided to produce a list of like the top women playwrights and things like that, which is amazing, and I commend them for all of their work.
Yeah.
And I think it should be more well known.
Yeah. I thought it was really cool when they talked about, well, first of all, I really liked how they talked about like how they started with like they started with no money, and it was just like a simple idea, and they put a list together, and then like as they're growing, like the list is growing, and like their outreach is growing. And then I also liked how they talked about that interview that they did, some woman did with, it was some director that was like very, or like some artistic director that was like very a big time guy, and he talked about when what he thought about when he was putting up a new playwright, whether it was like a man he was putting up a new playwright, and he was worried about like how like where his career would go, and then he was when a woman was the playwright, he was worried about like how little her career had been, or like the lack of experience or something like that. And I just thought that was like an interesting. I don't know how to feel about it, because I don't know, like it feels kind of backwards talking about it because like I'm a man, but like but yeah, I thought it was just an interesting thought process that like why I wonder why it goes like that.
So I probably thought like with the man who playwright, he was like, oh, he has such a big career in front of him.
Yeah.
And then the woman was like, you have no experience. So
Wasn't there another article on the same blog that was something along the lines of, it was one playwright who was a woman, submitted her plays as both a man and a woman, and didn't alter the play at all, just changed the name, and as a man it was much more successful than as a woman.
Yeah. I don't know, it's hearing about the male director and just the opportunities kind of theme that keeps on coming up. There's this horrible, like, it's not a dichotomy. There's a big word that describes it, but I don't have it in my head right now. There's this horrible kind of situation where you have women who are minorities in this case, but just minorities in general, who are accused of, not taking advantage of certain situations or opportunities or resources, when you realize, when these accusations are made, that these resources that people profess to exist don't actually exist, that people have much more reservation about hiring women and just employing them, and like, where will this woman's career go, and just, how unfair that is, and how hard it is to be a woman in theater, which I am much more kind of cognizant of as I've been reading these articles throughout the year.
We're pretty good here at this university.
Right on.
Yeah.
Next up, is that me?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So I have, the Tonys are just as white as the Oscars. Here are the #Tonys so white statistics. So this was a little bit of a surprise for me, I must admit, especially with the plays that have been on Broadway this year, and especially the ones that have been so incredibly successful. Hamilton. But honestly, with like the history of performing arts in America, it's not surprising to me. This article goes in depth and looks not only at this season, which still has a large, actually I don't know how large the majority is, but majority white nominees, because once again, production staff is mostly Caucasian field right now. Hopefully that's changing now. Carnegie Mellon at the forefront. We'll see.
Say the 4 white people sitting at the table.
I know. We'll see. I don't know what next year's design and production class looks like, but we'll see. Yeah.
They're all really good.
Cool. And they're in the podcast has to stay on track. But this article actually looks at a large number of. Here we have some really cool graphs, which you cannot see from there, I can guarantee. But you have, you can't see it, but there's a graph showing just the proportions of white, black, and Asian. And the white bar is up here, and the black and Asian bars are way down here. And this is throughout Tony's history, and it's just kind of this really stark contrast about what the Tonys are.
I thought it was really interesting. Well, I'm really excited for the nominees for this year to come out on Tuesday because it's going to be, well, first of all, CMU is going to dominate. But besides that, I think it's going to be really interesting because there's been such in history, like it's a very diverse year for Broadway. With Disgraced, there was Hamilton, there was Allegiance was a big one. The Color Purple is kind of like was revived. Even The King and I was last year, but there was I don't know if it opened yet, but there was Miss Saigon is coming back. So like it's next year. So like Broadway's definitely hopefully like turning into a way more diverse industry rather than like TV and film. But I thought it was interesting that even when they took away, because the Tonys is younger than the Oscars, but when they took away the 20-year difference, the gap in diversity actually became less, and it was only like a 0.45% gap between the Oscars and the Tonys. And I thought it was kind of interesting that the Tonys is a bit more diverse in the fact that like we do nominate more African Americans than the Oscars, but like our Hispanic and Asian gap is way less, but the Oscars is actually way more. So it's just weird, like where, like what
counts is
what counts?
Diverse.
Yeah, more diverse.
They're roughly the same level, but
it's just
I believe the article actually says that the Oscars are more diverse because they have roughly equal amounts of like Asian winners and Hispanic winners and Black winners, and the Tonys on the other hand have proportionally a much larger percentage of Black people who have won the award compared to Hispanics who are very like significantly less than the Blacks, and there's like 12 people who are Asian have won a Tony.
And there was like one Asian playwright ever to win the Tony, and it was like 30 years ago.
Yeah, and then there's 3 producers who have won
multiple
awards.
I don't know. I think I'm excited to see like where Broadway's going, especially with like the big push for Hamilton and the big push from like the White House pushing Broadway, and like really acknowledging those kinds of things and like arts in general. I'm hopeful for like the Tonys moving forward to be more diverse and just like like theater in general.
The like best leading actress in a musical the woman from King and I who played
Kelly O'Hara.
Yes.
Yeah.
Won last year, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then.
But Kelly O'Hara's white.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really?
It's a white woman.
No, it wasn't her. It was the.
Oh, she was the best supporting actress.
Oh,
yeah, the King's wife. The King's wife one. Yeah, I was like screaming. She was so good. She's also Michigan alum. So go Blue. Was it this article that talked about? Never mind.
Probably.
Yeah. Never mind. Kidding.
I guess we can move on to a new set of articles.
I've got one here.
Awesome.
So we're going to talk about The Conversation, the novel and play that predicted Donald Trump's rise and countered the swell of Great Depression demagoguery. So during the Great Depression, let me see if I can find his name. There was a play that was written to combat. It was called It Can't Happen Here, and it was about the Nazis and their rise in Germany and how a bunch of countries during this time of like super strife. I believe the international global unemployment rate was above.
It was like 33%.
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah.
And so a bunch of people were coming forth with like a bunch of countries were turning to dictatorships or militarization of their governments, which is from our standpoint at least bad. So this article really hits home about how arts has the power to influence politics and has been used in the past to influence politics. And since demagogues were rising in America during a time of economic strife in the 1930s, we can use the same plays or similar plays today to combat other potential dictators where we see them in our government and in our futures. And
I think honestly, I know it's sad, but like I feel like theater has become this like very highbrow thing that's like sometimes very hard to like get out to the public, to like the mass majority of public. But like back then it wasn't as difficult. At least theater I think was a little less a little more inexpensive. And I think that this would be a great idea if it were produced on like a television.
It's
Yeah,
like a
I would like
televised
yeah,
production.
exactly, either a televised production, which is like this whole nother bag of chips, but like also even if it just became like a short series or like a Netflix series, and I think it's something that like people should like hop on like immediately because with elections coming up, I think it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
But it also is weird to see that like people always talk about like history repeating itself, and I feel like it's like history repeating itself. People a lot of the times talk about like the Holocaust and like genocides and things like that, which are still occurring. But I think it's also interesting to look at it from like a political, just like leadership view, and seeing like that history repeats itself in that regard too, and seeing people like Donald Trump like that existed like 50 years ago and things like that. Yeah, it was just weird to see. Exactly, and to see like how they combated it, and I think that at this large of a scale, and like how people contact each other now, and like receive and how quickly people receive information now, it would be interesting to see something combating an idea like Donald Trump on a television media style thing.
Because the media has been one of his biggest proponents.
Yeah,
like
and
every time he like touches.
Yeah,
something.
Yeah,
It's like, oh.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because I was reading an article a long time ago about how Donald Trump doesn't pay for a lot of his own media coverage. Yeah, because he's so crazy and like so out there. The media just likes to cover him, so therefore he's kind of winning, you know, in that regard. Like he's beating the media system because he's paying for none of it. Yeah, which I just thought was like very, very discomforting. Yeah, but I would love to see how people would react to such like a large statement against Donald Trump through like the media or something like that in the form of art.
Yeah.
Or calling it art and seeing what if that would like aggravate a lot of people, or if it would like empower a lot of people, or like smack people in the face and wake them up kind of people.
Should we talk about the fence then?
Oh yeah, talk about it.
So there's
Here at CMU.
Here at CMU, or Carnegie Mellon University, since we haven't clarified that yet.
I mean, look what we're wearing.
Yes.
So
So we have the fence, capital T, capital F, out on like our common area. And the rules are that at night between midnight and 6 a.m. you can go out and paint the fence with your slogan or like group name, whatever. So people have done it for like Happy Birthday Stephen was up the other like a week ago.
Yeah, it's like the most painted structure in the world or whatever. Or
Greek
America.
organizations love to paint it to raise awareness for like fundraising events. Like that's the sort of visibility it has.
So super important part of CMU's history and its traditions. And a couple weeks ago, a group of people who weren't there in the morning painted it with Make America Great Again and then Trump 2016. And shortly later in the day, a bunch of people were really angry about this. There was a Facebook post with like, oh my God, what's going on? Who are these people? Which is a problem with freedom of speech, in my opinion. But anyways, they a couple people from I think actually the School of Drama went out. 2 people from the School of Drama went out later in the day and painted over the sign to make it stop saying Trump and say support Make America Great Again, Drump 2016, which Drumpf is a word brought up on by a comedian, John Oliver, to highlight the fact that Donald Trump is actually from an immigrant family as well. So, and then again, later in the day, someone went out with a bucket of white paint and got rid of all the words on the sign. And then another person, I think, went out and wrote, something about remembering CMU lives lost.
Yeah, I think what the important takeaway of like this idea is that art has the power to like make a serious statement and like start conversation, and that like sometimes when you take it off of like the reality and put it into like a little bit more of the on stage, like people are viewing it instead of living it, it makes things set in a little bit differently because you start to put yourself in that scenario rather than like actually living in that scenario, and that starts conversation, and I think that's where the start of political theater should begin. Like it should start as an idea and a conversation, and then move on to stage, and then move on to a talk, and then move on to like implementation. speaking of like implementation and like things on stage, we're going to talk about parents who censor high school theater are morons. This was an article directly talking about Pippin, CMU. Woo. It was talking about how Pippin has lots of sexual innuendos and things like that, some things that are inappropriate through the eyes of some parents, and that they don't want their family to use bad words, so they are trying to limit what their son's high school is putting on. And I thought it was so interesting when the mother started asking why schools didn't put on a nice morally straight show like Guys and Dolls. And then the author of the article went on to talk about Guys and Dolls with its gambling, drinking, and downright mockery of religion. Or The Music Man, about an unrepentant con artist who faces zero consequences for swindling an entire Iowa town. And then they looked at family fluff like Carousel, Rodgers and Hammerstein's grand tale of an abusive husband who can't mend his ways, or West Side Story, a musical about gang warfare and premarital sex. And then I thought it was interesting that they went on to talk about what we study in the classroom. And then in high school, our freshman year, a lot of us read The Scarlet Letter about a supposed adulteress, and then sophomores check out Brave New World, which depicts a dystopian future riddled with drug use and porn. And of course, there's Hamlet, the greatest work of Western dramatic literature, boasting a stage full of stabbed and poisoned corpses. So I thought it was really interesting that like parents are totally okay talking about death and murder and like very bloody abusive things, but they're not okay at talking about just sexual innuendos and like exposing their children to something that I don't know.
Like they're high schoolers.
Yeah,
They
like
know
they're
these
high school.
things.
They know what sex is, and they know. Yeah.
Interesting little factoid. The original script of Pippin, written for Scotch and Soda here at Carnegie Mellon, was not titled just Pippin, but Pimpin' Pippin. So if you thought the current incarnation was a little risque, try the Scotch and Soda one, I suppose.
Yeah, and I just thought it was interesting that like what people get offended by and like what people overlook. Especially, I was also there was like this little infographic on Facebook today that I was reading about like that whole the whole all those laws being passed about like transgenders in bathrooms and how you're not allowed transgender should not be allowed to go in the bathroom that they like associate by with their gender. And then it was like the infographic read something like transgenders should not be allowed to go in the bathrooms, but we should also be protecting our children. Like we should be, and then like it listed off all these different things that like we should really be afraid of, and like not like, you know what I mean, something that's so not such a big deal. And I thought that like so completely paralleled this article, and was like a mirror of this, and just seeing where like people get riled up. It's so insignificant, especially like in high school theater where we should be like exposing our kids to things like this.
Especially Pippin, because
yeah.
of, like it's such like the article mentioned how it's a great fit for teenagers.
Yeah.
About finding your place, and that's what high schoolers.
Yeah, exactly. And it says it touches their heart, and I think that's what's really important. Like, especially like in theater, giving kids the opportunity to talk about things like coming of age and like things like that, and finding their place in the world. It's something that's important and like shouldn't be overlooked just because there's like sexual innuendos in it, when we really should be focusing on like other things that have real dangers to our children and ourselves. Yeah.
It's also kind
Thanks,
of
Jake.
it's almost hypocritical. Is that the right word? That's probably not.
Sure.
It's kind of screwed up because we also have so much violence and sex in like TV and
Yeah.
other forms of media, but we won't do it on stage because the vast majority of TV shows nowadays have corpses and people screwing each other on screen, and somehow that's okay to like people to watch, and they're willing to let their kids watch that, but you can't have a sexual innuendo in Pippin because your son is actually saying the words.
Moving
I
onward.
think an article that could kind of connect to that
Here
has to
goes
deal with high
Oh,
school
this is so
theater.
funny. I love this
New
article.
New Zealand students suffer neck cuts in Sweeney Todd show.
Yes.
Well, it's basically like the title says. In a performance of Sweeney Todd, two 16-year-olds had to go to the hospital due to neck wounds during a production of Sweeney Todd at their high school. ridiculous. They said the razor that was used did not have a sharp edge and had been used numerous times in rehearsals. I think at some point it said it was like wrapped in duct tape or something.
Yeah, I wanted to hear about this.
Yeah,
Interesting thing
there's
about that.
yeah. There's an article. This is a BBC article that is based off of another article written in a local New Zealand newspaper. There's a link on the article that goes to the New Zealand newspaper itself, and if you follow the link, they detail the safety precautions that this high school did take. I have opinions about this because I think BBC is just inflating, because if you read the other article, they do mention, like, hey, there was like a couple of razor blades that had been dulled and then wrapped in duct tape and cellophane and foam and tested multiple times to make sure that they wouldn't cut. Also, if you're actually going to cut into someone, you need to put a decent amount of pressure on a blade. So I actually don't think it was the razor blades that caused the neck injuries.
Yeah, it was
Simply because the New Zealand article also mentions, like, they had one interview and this person was like, well, it could have been the death slide that the person goes into after they get their neck slit on stage. They go into like this chute that like pushes them off stage. If you've ever seen Sweeney Todd, it's great. Wonderful.
And I feel like this article was like really lacking.
Super safe.
If they didn't.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
lacking a lot of information. Like it left it very vague. But I also thought that like it was it just brought up a bigger issue, like to not use real things on stage, whether it was real or not here. I think it's a reminder to like everyone, like whether they're in props or rehearsal or just in acting class, like don't use real things on stage. That's why it's stage and it's play. Find something that looks like it. Like there's a whole career called props artisans that make fake things to look real. Buy a fake thing, make a fake thing, never put a real knife on stage.
They also make props weapons
Yeah.
now. Like you can buy a sword that is pre-dulled and safe and tested. You can also get guns if you ever want to use a firearm on stage and have that realistic gunshot. They have baffled weapons that don't actually fire things. There's still like a ton of safety concerns, and you should do the safety training if you're going to do that, because killing people is bad. And hurting people and people ending up in the hospital, as these two boys did in that article, is bad. Do your research. Don't hurt people.
And don't believe everything you read online.
Yeah, because the media inflates a lot.
Yeah.
And the two boys were okay. They were nice too.
Cool. So we have here, going off, this would have been a great one to read after we were talking about the Trump on the fence, but this is, this doesn't have a title.
That's just because, which one was it?
According to a recent study by the Pew Research Center, 40% of millennials believe it would be
That's the
appropriate for the
free speech.
government to restrict speech
that's
that
the
offends
free speech one.
minority
the-
groups.
Can We Take a Joke?
Yeah.
Is the title of the article.
So this mindset is manifesting itself on college campuses across the country, from the disinvitation of controversial speakers to top comedians refusing to perform at universities. So this is a very timely article, I feel, especially given recent events with the fence and whatnot, but also given the nature of our political arena right now with Donald Trump once again and his inflammatory remarks regarding minorities especially, and people kind of, bringing up, well, he is, as much as we hate to admit it, a legitimate political candidate for public office, and we do have to consider him, as much as we might disagree with his views and like what is free speech and what is offensive, and how do you mix the two up, and where do we go from here? And while this is not necessarily theater oriented, I think it's very important to consider the points made in this article, or the research discussed in this article, when you consider what sorts of shows to put on. Once again, like, I'm reminded about reading an article about Yellowface production of The Mikado at the beginning of the year, and sure, when you've got an all-white cast and you want to put on this show and you think it could be a great show, you're going to put them in yellowface, even though it's an incredibly bad idea.
They actually shut down that
Thank
production
God.
of the Mikado. That was at the Met? Was it?
I thought it was,
No, it wasn't the Met.
it was somewhere in the East Coast
I think what's interesting about this article specifically is that it highlights like our generation and kind of like not but kind of stereotypes like the coming generations and like where they're, I guess like
about us.
yeah,
basically.
it's about us. So like I didn't take offense to it because I think it's just where our generation is going. Like I think with so much media and so much access to like cell phones and things like that at such a young age, we've gone in such a direction of like we take in information so quickly that like we do get offended very easily, like just because there's so much like you have to filter.
And about that, like, I think it's our generation is specifically shown to be this way because of social media. It's like we have more outlets for free speech, so more people can see what we've said and get offended by it.
Yeah.
Previous generations, it was like just what was covered on the news or what you called a person like in face or over a phone.
In that regard, it's also really important to realize that part of this like increased sensitivity to like what offends others and like the viewpoints of others is simply that we're being exposed to more perspectives on the world by social media and the fact that what we digest and what's given to us, you know, through a variety of different screens or printed media is not by those who necessarily would have historically had enough of a position of power to own a company to disseminate their viewpoints and opinions and views. And so it's really, I think, valid of this study to point out, you know, where that comes into play. But yeah.
Getting more sensitive just means we're getting more diverse as a community, I think. But
I think it means we whine a lot, but
we're also getting more diverse.
I agree with you. However, at the same time, I think it's important for everyone to voice their opinion because this article did mention how there was a movement to prohibit speech against minority groups, which I agree with. Like, you shouldn't speak against minority groups because everyone is a human and everyone deserves your respect. But the minute you limit the speech of a minority hate group, you also have the potential to legally prohibit the speech of another minority, and it's a dangerous road to stop someone from saying something.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Next article, Ruth, hit me up.
All right. So, I think that
this is Artists Are Narcissists. This is Hamilton in prisons.
Let's close this one. This one's so happy.
Okay, I love this one. Yeah. Okay. So, do you have to be narcissistic to be successful as an artist?
And the article says yes.
The article says yes. They have it starts up with shameless self-promotion and artistic navel gazing have gotten a scientific boost from an unexpected source.
That's navel as in belly button, not as in Navy related. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. But essentially, a group of people have gone out and written a formula to correlate signature size, which they believe is a form of narcissism, to success as an artist and how much your paintings sell at auction. I don't think this is a legitimate thing, personally. I mean, there are just like having a large signature does not mean you're a narcissist. One of the people they actually pull up and mention in their art articles is Vincent van Gogh, who sells rather well and has a large signature. However, if you do some basic research into Vincent van Gogh's personal history, he suffered from serious bouts of depression. He, in the end, he actually committed suicide.
He didn't sell a single painting, or he sold like 2 paintings while he was alive. His personal success actually only came after his suicide.
Yeah.
Just tragic. But
they argue in this article that he was a narcissist and a successful artist.
Well, he definitely was. I mean, I feel like because your art kind of this sounds so corny, but like your art does live on, especially when it's like a visual piece of art. It definitely lives past you. So like technically he was a successful artist. And just because he was depressed doesn't mean he wasn't a narcissist. I think there's like I think this is an interesting topic and like it should definitely be examined further. But I also think that like the way they're examining it is just wrong. I think you should be looking into like your personal history and like things like that of successful artists and then of not successful artists. And I think as they move forward, in history, and like they also notate in the article that like as this more not mo- it's modern is the artist that they examine. What's the new artist? Contemporary artists. Sorry, thank you. Contemporary artists don't line this formula kind of falls through the bottom, and doesn't prove their argument true anymore. So I think it's just a lot more research needs to go into this topic, but I think it's such an interesting idea.
I think like
Talking
the
about
idea of it is
narcissism and
good.
successfulness.
Just the signature sounds
Yeah, 'cause
ridiculous. But
I think there's like a level of like, yeah, you kind of do have to be not a narcissist, but you do have to be like a self almost like a self promoter or a self rooter to like really be successful. Because like if you're not backing yourself, who is? But I don't know if it has anything to do with someone's signature.
Looking at
Yeah.
this, they have a quite sizable equation down here that starts with the natural log of highest estimate sub IJT equals alpha plus beta sub narcissism, whatever. It goes on for a while. It looks like they've come up with some sort of weird way to mathematize this really complex relationship that they profess to exist between signature size and success. And I'm sure that they could come up with something much more feasible and believable if they didn't make signature size.
Exactly.
That was
But also
mentioned.
research was done at Florida State University. Go Noles. Okay.
But
Yeah.
I have many.
Yeah. Okay, awesome, Reed.
Shall we move on to cruise safety meeting? ... For real. Being safety conscious touring industry. Being a safety conscious touring
Good, Ruth.
industry.
Good.
Sorry, titles are hard, guys. The font is the largest, but so this article was written in light of the Paris attacks and just casts a light on, for me, something I hadn't really considered, which is how hard it is to keep in like disaster scenarios, how hard it is to keep people in the performing arts, especially in touring, which this article talks about, safe. Because there's already so many moving pieces in a perfectly safe, normal, dare I say, like, perfect day of production operations, that if you throw one wrench in the works, especially if it's not theater related, that means like that we won't necessarily have a safety plan or 4 safety plans for if it goes wrong. If you throw that wrench into the works, it's pretty unpredictable how a specific company or production is going to handle it. So this article just basically lays down some basic guidelines, create a plan, the day sheet, precautionary, controlled halting. These are all kind of like types of plans for different scenarios. Run, hide, defend, and then some, travel safety tips and some blurry screenshots of iPhone screens. And it's just, while I don't think that this is necessarily the best organized article in terms of how we should be going about, putting these procedures into place and standardizing them, I do think that this is a conversation that does need to happen in the performing arts because as productions are getting bigger and going global, obviously the sorts of concerns you're going to have about the safety of your cast and crew is they're going to change, and I think we need to adapt to that as an industry.
It even applies to non-touring shows, like basic.
Yeah.
This like
In
the
New York City.
essence of this is like know what you're going to do beforehand, so that if something bad happens, you can react immediately without like going for 5 minutes first. Like just even like as a normal show, like what are you going to do if an actor has a heart attack on stage? Or didn't someone actually? There was another article earlier this year about someone who actually died during a performance, and like.
Well, just on some level, people have been preparing for that. Like, I think that our stage managers actually had to answer this year a scenario about if you have an actor who's about to go on stage, but you've just received a phone call that 2 of their close family members have been in a near fatal car accident and are like on the border of life and death and could die any minute. Like, do you tell that actor? And while scenarios like that, like horrible freak things, do happen and have been considered, and there are like loose sort of guidelines about how you should approach them, stuff, especially with like international terrorism, especially, I think that the Paris attacks were some of the first, actually, no, that's a lie. There's definitely been some in South America, are some of the more high profile ones to target like entertainment venues. Um, the world's not necessarily becoming a safer place right now, especially. And touring shows are, while they're not necessarily targets right now, could become targets, I guess, is a point that maybe not this article, but another article.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But I also think the way they break it down is kind of interesting of like which protocols to do. I think the first thing that popped in my head was like, this needs to be standardized. Like USITT needs to sit down and talk about like, I don't know if it's about like terrorism in general, like terrorism specifically, or just like different safety protocols that like some are standardized, but like other things that need to be standardized, like what happens when there's a this in the theater, or that happens around the theater, or like a family member, things like that. And I think it's a bigger conversation for a larger group of people, not just like these people who write the article, but it's a great starting point to really bring it up at a USITT level, and like bring it up at entertainment venues in general. And like, I don't know, like I'm sure there's like a union or something convention for like film and TV and things like that. If not, there should be. But like talking about how to keep all these people safe and like mentally safe and physically safe and emotionally safe and things like that, like in these crazy scenarios. I think it's a great conversation starter.
I think that we in theater are so conditioned to like not wanting to talk about what could go wrong, and like not wanting to talk about all the risks that there are, that we kind of shy away from talking about all these like potentially catastrophic situations with the kind of horrible mindset that, oh, if you don't talk about it, it won't happen. Kind of like knock on wood sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that this article brings up a lot of good points, like easy things you can do in other countries on a touring production. Like learning what their emergency phone number is if you need to call it. Basic things like putting like your emergency contact information in your phone that's accessible by just clicking the emergency button on your home screen. I think just doing that is a step forward.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Final article.
Yay!
Oh,
The
awesome.
best article. The cutest article.
I love this so much. So, this one is called Hamilton in the Big House, and it's about I don't know who it is. I believe it's a person who works in a prison trying to use art as a way to rehabilitate these men who have been like beaten down their entire lives, and their perspective on Hamilton and how it's affecting these men, which like it's according to this article, it's the first time that some of these men have been able to identify with a piece of art, because almost all the time they're portrayed as the stereotypical villain. They're the men who like are ruining other people's lives, and the victim's family views them as this terrible villain when they can identify themselves with Hamilton, because many of them came from struggling families and had very hard childhoods and rebelled against becoming the person that they have become, or they see themselves being represented as their entire lives, only to inevitably end up in prison, which is that. And so this person is talking about how like these men love Hamilton and can identify with Hamilton, and it's helping them phenomenally bring up the conversation about their childhoods and how art affects them.
Yeah, I thought it was first of all, I didn't even know that this was like this rehabilitation like idea was a thing in prison. I didn't know theater was a thing that was offered in prison. I just never had that idea. After reading the article, I'm so interested in it. I'm like would love to get involved. Like, and I'm totally gonna do research about it. But I thought what was cool is that it wasn't just about like the character Hamilton. It was about like where Hamilton was being presented and where Hamilton was being, how it was being presented and like who else was in the show. I thought it was awesome that they watched the live television, not the live, but like the broadcast with Obama, and seeing like so many people and so many different ethnicities and like genders and things like that. Being portrayed at not only on Broadway but in the White House, and like how exciting that must have been for them. and how awesome it was to like relate to so many different characters, and not only characters, but people. Because I think Hamilton rides this like very fine line of like you see a character on stage and you see an actor playing a character on stage, especially at the end. When the song was like "Who Tells Your Story," and like it really does transcend into just like an actor, an individual, talking to another individual about like who they are and what they are and how they want to be portrayed in life. And I think that's what makes Hamilton so important. And I thought it was really cool that this woman is taking the time out of her life to really impact other people's lives in such a positive way.
Yeah, I thought it was really.
So Jake likes Hamilton.
I love Hamilton. I love Hamilton.
I thought it was really interesting.
Ham for Hamilton.
How well Hamilton like fit into like the lives of these prisoners. Like some of the lines, I'm like, oh my god, it like correlates so well. Especially like like Aaron Burr at the very end, like now I'm the villain in your history.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was just like, oh my god.
Cool.
Because everyone is a human and everyone is complex and no one is inherently evil. Everyone makes the decisions that they have made for a reason, and there's no true villains out there. Just like Aaron Burr, because he's pushed down and you see both sides of the story in this show, and these men are living both sides of the story.
Yeah, I just
like
exactly. I just thought it was so interesting, and the article closed with some really cool statements, and it said, "Representation matters. Representation is beautiful, and I'm not willing to wait for it." So I thought it was a cute way to like incorporate Hamilton into the article and really talk about some like very serious and really cool, I don't know, issues, if an issue can be cool, and really taking art and moving it in like a positive, interesting direction.
Maybe making some social change.
Yeah, social change, guys. Okay, cool.
Maybe, fixing the prison system.
Yeah. Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
So
That's
another
it.
podcast.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Thank you.